God means parade God for a reason, because the part that says Hallelujah means save me. Save me. But the Yah on the back of it, on the end of the word says, who saves me? And this word, if people, comes from Alleluia. Notice it doesn't say Alleluia, Mom, because Mom doesn't save me. It doesn't say Alleluia, Dad. Dad doesn't save me. It doesn't say Alleluia, Pastor Grable out there, because I don't save you. It says Alleluia. And Yah is the first part of God's name in Hebrew. Yahweh. Alleluia. So when we say this, we're saying a word that means God saves us. And he saves us by bringing Jesus back from the dead to be our Savior. And that's what we celebrate today. Jesus didn't stay dead. He came back alive. And that God saves us. That's what Hallelujah means. So this time instead of yay, God, say 1, 2, 3, and let's go Hallelujah. Okay? You ready? Let's see if the big people can do this too, all right? On 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Would you like to go right around there, right there, and see if you can find a special basket or something? Yeah, right around there. Right, keep going. Right around there. Okay, right around. Keep going. Keep going. Look down. Look down. Keep going. You see something? Can you bring it back here? Can you bring it? You see it? Somebody else. You know, take the whole thing. Yeah. Thank you. Wow. When I was a little boy, just about as big as you are, I couldn't say the word Easter. And so the Easter Bunny never came to our house. The Easter Bunny never came, but the Scooter Bunny did. Because that was what I thought his name was. So yesterday, the most amazing thing that happened, I was at my house, the Scooter Bunny knocked at my door and said, I have a whole bunch of eggs for you to give some very special people. Now, the Easter Bunny or the Scooter Bunny doesn't save us either. Jesus does, but it's a very special day, and I want you to each have an egg. Now, but you have to make me a promise. The promise is, don't open it until after church. Can you do that? I don't want to find anything on the pews. I don't want to hear any crunching sounds. I can't crunch something, okay? And there are 3 different things with this egg, and some of it may have to do with something that you need to sort of like look at, but there are other things in there too. So make sure that there's something for everybody, but you make sure that you show it to Mom and Dad and have them open it before you do anything with it, okay? Because maybe you can swap something with somebody else. Now, do you think you can all, as good Christian children, knowing that there are plenty here, can you all stand up without killing each other? Can you all feel like you want to take one of these and then go ahead and say thank you? east side of town in 1985. And because the first 6 months of my internship were so rough, my supervisor made me go to every single group that had the word Cleveland, Urban, or Lutheran in it. I was pretty tired, and I took a 1 week of vacation that they gave us the week after Easter. So Monday morning after Easter, on a day not unlike this one, I left Cleveland for Baltimore to go visit my best friend who was on his internship there. A snowstorm chased me right over the Allegheny Mountains, and when I got there was evidence that it had been warm and beautiful at one time, but it was now about 23 degrees. So we decided we were going to take a little trip to Washington, D.C. as part of this, and because it was cold and it was windy, and because I had been there already a couple of times before when I was younger, I began to think, you know, you've seen one big old honking white building with, you know, sand, whatever kind of Indiana limestone that is, you've seen them all. So I said to my friend, let's see if we can find Ford's Theater. Because I'm a real Lincoln buff, and I've never been able to make it there on the other visits that I've made here in Washington. So let's see if we can find it. The reason that Ford's is so hard to find is because it's not in the monument section of Washington. It's kind of like right in the downtown business district. So we started out, and we trudged up one street and down the other, and couldn't find it, and got hungry and decided we'd stop for lunch. So we went to lunch at Burger King. Very good. And sat there and had a wonderful lunch. And John started looking through all of his maps and everything, which we call cheap souvenirs, are the things that you pick up, you know, that you don't have to pay for, so that when you go home you can give somebody a souvenir of your trip that you didn't actually have to pay for. And we tried to find how to get to this place, and we still couldn't find it. So 4 to 5 from our lunch, we got up, we left Burger King, we went down a couple of doors, and he started rippling through his maps trying to find out where we were at. I kind of leaned up against the building, and as I did, I looked across the street, and in the middle of this big, real busy business section with a 7-Eleven, and I don't know, an auto parts store, and a candy store, there's this building, kind of like a building out of time, right in the middle of this big old block, tall, narrow house. And you know, I stood there for a moment, and I thought, isn't that kind of strange that there's a house, somebody's house in the middle of all this, who want to live there? As I got to thinking about it, I thought, this house looks familiar. And finally I realized it was the Peterson house, where they carried Lincoln after he had been shot. And I remember that the Peterson house was across the street from Ford's Theater. I was leaning right up against the wall with my back covering a plaque that said, Ford's Theater. So I said to my friend, John, this is it. This is Ford's Theater. He said, what, here? He said, 2 doors down from Burger King? And I said, yes, don't you remember reading in your history book about how Abe and Mary stopped and had a Whopper on their way to the theater that night? And he called me something the equivalent of a smart aleck, but anyway. So we went inside and found that the next tour was going to be starting in about half an hour, 20 minutes, and a few other people straggled in. I don't know if any of you have been there before, but Ford's Theater has been restored to look exactly the way it did the night that Lincoln was shot. And this tour guide from the National Forest Service, who runs that particular part of the monument, didn't just tell us the story of Lincoln's last night. He drew us into it. Drew us into the story so that we felt like we were there. We retraced Booth's footsteps through the lobby and up the stairs and across the dress circle and down into the little hallway. And it felt like we were a living part of the people who had lived and died in that place. And it was really an overwhelming feeling to feel like you were there, that you were transported to this place in history, this place in time. And people got really, really quiet. The tour ended on the main floor of the theater. And we all stood there just kind of like drinking all of this in. And up on the stage of Ford's, there was this kind of abstract, kind of looked like somebody nailed a bunch of boards together thing sticking out, kind of like it's sunburst. And the guy in the group raised his hand and said in a hushed voice to the tour guide, "Is that the set for Our American Cousin?" plane Lincoln was watching the night that he died. Tour guide turned around and he said, "Oh, that's the set for Godspell. That opened Saturday night. You want to buy a ticket?" And immediately, we were brought right back to the here and now, and kind of put at odds, too. We sort of liked being in that feeling of being in the past, and someone said, wait a minute, you mean this historic place, the place where they're going to put Godspell on Saturday night? What's going on here? And the guy said, a conscious decision was made that even though this place had been a place where a tragedy had happened, and that it was a place where a death had happened, that it was going to be made a place where life is celebrated. And Lincoln loved the theater, and what better celebration of life, and what better use of a theater than to use it as a theater, and not just some kind of museum or monument. So yes, Godspell will be there Saturday and something else next week. I often remember that visit around this time of year because you all know that Lincoln was assassinated on Good Friday. And every few years on significant anniversaries of that event, they hold a big gala at Ford's Theater. And knowing that it's on the street, it really isn't set up for that kind of thing, I can't help but marvel about all the Hollywood equipment and the Hollywood people and the singers and Barbra Streisand who's ever on the hot sitcom at the moment, and all the politicians who blow into town and blow into that place for the big event, and then blow out again. And I wonder whether they feel that that place is a place where significant life happens now, instead of just a place where they think about something that happened a long time ago. I tell that story because here we are, all gathered in this place, and all over the world today, there will be churches filled with people who have come for something. And I wonder what it is. When we sang, Jesus Christ is risen today, I wonder if it meant that for you. Or if for many of us, what we don't really mean when we come and sing that hymn is, Jesus Christ was risen a long time ago. And isn't that nice? And here I am to sing about that. The reason I wonder about that is because a Gallup poll showed recently that fewer and fewer American people find churches to be places that connect to their real lives. Fewer and fewer Americans find churches to be places that connect to their real lives. So I wonder, why are we here? That thing about religion or church connecting to our lives, I think, may be true. Think of just the last 20 years. I'm not asking you to go all the way back to the Depression or World War II or even Korea or the Beatles. Just go back to John Travolta and Saturday Night Fever. That was only 20 years ago. Do you remember a period in our history when, as a people, having a deep religious public expression of who we were was assumed? Do you remember a time when it was assumed that being deeply religious was a part of our public expression? I do. I remember a time when stores didn't used to be open on Sunday all the time. I remember when a few heroic people, my father, one of them, who was a firefighter, was expected to work on holidays, and doctors and nurses, but you really held them up as an example of heroes who would do that on days where other people got to spend it in special ways. My mother also, who worked at Walgreens, was approached by her manager a few years after that, who told her, we're going to stay open on Christmas and on Easter. Can you work? And I remember my mother agonizing over the decision to leave all of what Christmas and Easter were supposed to mean for us to go work. And finally she decided, maybe there will be sick people. Maybe there will be people who need prescriptions. Maybe there's something that I can do by being there. And so she did. The funny thing is, after 3 years, they quit opening on those holidays. But you can't put it. Anybody except them know why? Why do they quit staying open? And when not enough people come, what happens? What doesn't happen? No people come. You don't make any money. Didn't make any money on those holidays. I guess people would still be sick and still need prescription. But anyway, at that time, a public expression of religion was the norm, and you had to really agonize and think of whether you were going to make a decision to not do that. Not being religious has always been tolerated. That was always tolerated if you chose not to have any expression fine. The world that we live in is 180 degrees opposite of that now. Now the world that you and I live and work in tells us that every single day is the same as every other day. And they're all secular. Now, having a religious conviction is the thing that's tolerated, barely. You can be religious if you have to be, but you better keep it to yourself. You know, that better be a private thing between you and God. Want an example? When the owners of the Cleveland Indians decided to schedule the opening game of the home season on the most solemn day of the church year, Good Friday, I'm pretty sure that they didn't do it with malicious glee. I'm sure they didn't look at the calendar and go, what day can we make all of the Christians crazy? They didn't do that. The example, though, that proves my point is what they did was thought of that day as the same as any other day. Now, without casting any aspersions on any of you if you went to the game or not, and I know a few of you did, that's not the whole point. My point is, do you at least remember a time when you at least thought of what you were doing between 12 and 3 on Good Friday? Now, it just goes by. That's the world that we live in. And yet, all over the world, the culture that we live in, we sort of act like God only exists when we give him permission to. And we really give him permission on a day like this. There are 2 times. Christmas and Easter. Yep, you get to exist. And I wonder what it is that we came for. Did you come because worship is an integral part of who you are? Did you come to hear a story of long ago to be brought into the past? Did you come to be comforted that you know that when you come today, somebody will have taken care of flowers on the cross, someone will have provided wonderful music, and you'll be able to, sort of have a tradition? Did you come because your wife told you you won't get dinner today? No? Well, maybe you came to please mom or dad. Maybe you came because you're deeply faithful. There could be a lot of different reasons, but I think this suggests that maybe one reason that we come on a day like today is because we might be a little bit afraid. Now you might be thinking, I'm not me, I'm not afraid. You were right about that not having dinner thing, but I'm not afraid. I've got it together. But think about it. Think about it. No matter who you are, no matter how you come, there is a place in your life where you have already stood in the grave of a loved one, someone that you have loved, and you will wonder what happens now. No matter what your job, no matter what your profession, your family, your children, your life, your 401k plan, whatever it is that you have, there will be a point in your life when you will come to the end of it, and all that will go right out of your hands. And you know it. Haven't you at least wondered kind of what it is that happens past all of that? And aren't we maybe here because it may turn out that there just might be a God on the other side? And we kind of wonder, what happens? What happens when I get to that point where all choices are out of my hands? So what we proclaim here is that there is a God at the other end of that, and not just any God. Not just the God of do the best that you can and live the best life that you can. Not just the God of, be nice or do whatever you can or whatever. But the God who raised Jesus from the dead is the one that we proclaim in this place. That that's the version of who God is that we sang Jesus Christ is risen today, we mean today in our lives now. That because of the knowledge that all of what we could do and all of how we could bring this story to a happy ending doesn't work. Easter is not just the story of the happy ending where God raises Jesus from the dead so we can go back up to heaven and quit bugging us and leave us alone. It's God raising Jesus from the dead and putting him right in the middle of our lives now. What we celebrate today is all of what Jesus has been telling us the last 6 weeks about how we're going to live life in this new life. And you know, finally, that is something that is up to God and not to us. And that's why it's good news. That's why we can come and celebrate. Not because it's a swing party and we'll make ourselves feel better, because if that incredible news is true, that God could do that and raise Jesus from the dead, and say because of that, life has the last word for us and not death, then somehow that ought to make a difference for the way that we live our lives now. If this message of resurrection does not speak to your life and to what you were doing yesterday at 10 till 12, and what you're going to be doing tomorrow at 10 till 12, and what you're going to be doing next Sunday at 10 till 12, then it really has no meaning at all. Jesus Christ is risen today. One of my best friends is a pastor who got his start in the 50s, in the glorious 50s, when everybody came to church. He's retired. And I said, boy, what a great time to be a pastor. Everybody came to church. You were filled on weeks even when it wasn't Easter. And he said, you know, it was really good, but in a way it wasn't. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you know, it was a respectable thing to do. Remember, it was the time when, you know, you did a good job. You had to go be a member of the church. Everybody came to church. It was a respectable thing. And when I tried to preach about Easter, I think it lost some power. I said, what do you mean it lost power? He said, because it was so respectable, I tried hard to make Easter reasonable. I had chickens coming out of eggs, tulips coming out of the ground, anything that I could do to make it seem just like a reasonable part of life. When I preached to people in the 50s, he said, I told them, nice people continue to be nicer. But that's not the power of what Easter is about. Because it's not reasonable. It's not the story that nice people would come up with. Because you see, Easter is not the plausible end of a religious story. It's God's act in a hideous situation. Because the Word, which is Christ, was made flesh and died. And Christ is risen indeed and goes before you into Galilee. Your Galilee. The Galilee of Bagley Road and Pearl Road and I-71 at rush hour. The Galilee of the South Park, Southland, Parmatown, Great Northern Mall, where you jostle Christ among the Target carts and the other people trying to get there. Galilee Street, the street in which you live, and where he waits to move in, fulfilling the promise to be with you always, even to the end of the age. So rise